some fundamental flaws with fundamentalism or modern day Protestant evangelical thought, or just some of the common urban myths. Let me just say, dispelling those. And these are things that I've come across or heard. The early Christians, the first 300 years, were not Calvinists. They didn't believe as the Calvinists. In fact, they could not have believed anything like what the Protestants now believe. The New Testament did not exist until the books were written by the apostles, or by the, by the followers of Jesus, yeah. But the church was started at Pentecost, so there's no scriptures to follow for Christians. The Old Testament the Christians used and quoted from was the Greek Old Testament. This later would get rejected by the Jews when there was the break between the Christians and the Jews. The definite one. Which it can be debatable who first who wanted to make this distinction. Definitely there were, both sides had reinforced these ideas of they're separate from us, we're separate from them. One thing I've heard, and I've heard this by King James onlyists, is that Origen invented the Septuagint, or wrote the Septuagint. Origen didn't much care for the Septuagint, and the Septuagint was beginning to, it was a translation made in Alexandria. The dates vary, but centuries before Christ. And it was a translation praised by the Jews. Since the lingua franca of the world was Greek. And then it would be, later on, it would be Latin and Greek, and as time goes, it changes. What the most common tongue is. Another, and this is just more the conspiratorial stuff, like more, I guess, irrational, anti-Roman Catholic stuff. And I don't know where to begin first with this. Believing that the Bishop of Rome was all-powerful. I don't know how or why the Protestants have fully bought into many Roman Catholic beliefs, or at least distortions of history. They seem to accept Constantine's donation, even though Luther exposed that as a fraud, as just BS. That these church fathers and the Catholics were trying to oppress the real gospel, and that the true Christians, and that would be the, who are basically the equivalent of the modern day Protestant, whether Baptist or I should say, whether Arminianist or Calvinist, or what degree you fall in there, were people like the Marcionites, Arians, Ebionites, Nazarenes, Bogomils, Cathars, Albigensians, Ophites, Ranters, Montanists. Now, these span hundreds of years, the groups that I'm naming, but I've heard them all. Another one, and this is more about the Catholics, that the Catholics added the Apocrypha and the Jews never, or I can't, God, it's not apocryphal. What the Roman Catholics called it Deuterocanon. again, the Protestants adopt this from the Catholics. The Catholics demoted certain books of the Old Testament for God knows why reason. Well, I think it was Counter-Reformation, because the papacy for a while was willing to compromise pretty much anything. And if you look at Pope John Paul II, he kissed a copy of the Quran. I'm Antiochian Orthodox, and this irritated us greatly because our holy cities of like Damascus and Antioch, we moved to the holy see had to be moved just over to Damascus because of the just annihilation of Antioch. The first place Christians were called Christians. The Quran and Islam has slaughtered and martyred more Christians than pagan Romans ever could. So this compromise is ridiculous, and the Counter-Reformation, because in Second Maccabees there's a part where they actually pray for people who had died. They said, they just said a short prayer for people who had died. And some Protestants took this, that's praying to the saints and praying people out of purgatory. It had nothing like that. There's no purgatory. Purgatory came up with much. There's medieval stuff that came up with. Again, what gets called early Catholic, I just got into it with somebody about this. They said, they mocked me for saying the Philistines were Greek sea people. They weren't Greeks, and not everybody in Anatolia was Greek, and I'm surprised what Anatolia was. Sicily, southern Italy, the Greek islands, and Anatolia was Greek. Now, what Greek meant back then that was 3,000 years ago, isn't what we mean by Greek today. Same thing with British. What it meant 2,000 years ago doesn't mean what it means today. Almost any word that is continually used doesn't mean what it means. Catholic back then, and I've heard it from Baptist ministers, Methodist ministers, or pastors, or whatever you call them, Anglican priests, Anglican bishops, Lutherans, all stripe will say we are Catholic. We're not papal Roman Catholic, and they'll say papal or papist, which papist is a weird term to it. So essentially, if you use the New Testament that's in the King James Bible, that's Catholic Christianity at its base. The other forms were Gnostic and Judaized. And then there was stranger things like Marcionism, which denied Jesus ever being born or resurrecting, which, right. And it's very, 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 very strange. These how these get started or why they're still around. Let's see. The Vatican, or this one, the Vatican invented the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they're hiding the real Gospels, that were found in the caves of Qumran, that were part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Vatican is hiding them. Well, Dead Sea Scrolls have no Christian works in them. Now, they're of the same time period, or just before Jesus, so they're of the strain of Judaism. They're not an anti-Christian form of Judaism, because they couldn't be. So in an early look before, there was a divide between the form of Judaism that would become Christianity and the form of Judaism that would then become modern-day Judaism, which was a reaction against the Christians, and wound up expelling a lot of these already accepted ideas in Judaism. Not to mention they were discovered in Israel by the Israelis, and they're housed in the Book of the Shrine. And if you know anything about the Roman Catholic Church and the post-Holocaust Jews of Israel, they don't exactly get along. So I don't think the Jewish Israelis would have handed over basically Torah scrolls, the oldest that we find, to the Pope. That's not true. Oh, the Donatists, I've heard that. They're the true Christians. Or they're the true Protestants. When they were even stricter than Cyprian, all you have to do is read Cyprian. Or the Gospels were written in Aramaic. That's another one. Now, I do have the Peshitta, which is a Targum, basically. It's a translation. And there are Aramaic New Testament works in it. There's a very, very early Aramaic manuscript tradition. Again, Antiochia, it's called Syriac. Oh, yeah, here's the thing. Council of Nicaea. I already did a video about this. The Pope hated Constantine, so they didn't get along. Constantine moved the capital, really irritated people in Rome, so Romans didn't get along. Romans weren't at the first two councils, actually, of Nicaea and Constantinople. The Bible wasn't assembled at Nicaea. The Trinity wasn't mentioned at Nicaea. Although Christ's deity which would affect the next council, called Constantinople, which would formulate what we now define as the Trinity. Ishtar and Mary, and none of that was talked about at Constantinople. It was a debate over whether Christ was a created being, or whether he was one with the Father and he was God sent. This would be all fleshed out at the next councils. Here's one. The Roman Church adopted paganism and blended the Virgin Mary with pagan goddesses such as Isis and Ishtar and Minerva and Hera and mother goddesses and various pagan religions. No, this comes actually very late when Rome starts doing this, when Rome actually starts giving titles to the Virgin Mary and all these strange things, which now the Eastern Orthodox, my communion, the church that I belong to, we think that's very disrespectful of the Theotokos. That's the title that we give her, and it only tells us about Christ. It doesn't tell us really much about her, because we're concerned about Christ. We're concerned that she is looking like a goddess. Now, this developed from Middle Ages on. Paganism had been destroyed. The early church in Rome was good. Paul wrote to it. Paul praised it. There's Clemens. There were plenty of martyrs in Rome. It was later on. It was after Augustine, in our views, after Augustine, when it started getting corrupt, and when it basically held rule over too big of land, and its head got too big. Basically, it thought too much of itself, and then tried to boss the rest of the world around, and tried to boss other bishops around, and then that inevitably led to a split with the rest of the Christians in the world, which were east of Rome, which most Protestants don't know ever existed. They don't know about Antioch or Alexandria or Constantinople, or that Christianity actually stretched down into India and up into China. It was not connected with Rome at all. It was actually ruled by Antioch. If you want to know more about Orthodoxy or Antiochian Christianity or Alexandrian Christianity, Chalcedonian Christianity, message me or leave a comment. Or if you want to debate any of these things or dispute them, message me. Just remember, you should probably ask people why they believe what they believe or what they mean when they say what. Refrain from being horribly condescending, and refrain from using foul language. And race hate and threats are not going to be tolerated on this channel. Peace to you. May God save Serbia, Syria, and Ireland.